So congrats everyone. Not much of a hiatus as I had potentially anticipated. It just so happens after I kind of finished filming kind of the last episode and kind of I'd mentioned the hiatus, shortly after that I was kind of like, oh well, let me think, I could actually do this. And part of that is actually because I have a new idea. As you can tell, this series is now about DMing. I'm going to do kind of little how-tos, kind of how to kind of get going on DMing, how to start, what do you need. There'll be tips and tricks and stuff I've learned. A lot of it is also just trying to how you can start DMing without really needing that much. How it's not all complicated. It's really not that big of a deal. You can do it pretty easily. I mean, easily, but it's not like you need a huge investment or kind of to start things up. I apologize for the hiatus between the second to last and the last episode, the first It's Herbert Chronicles. I was actually on vacation. I was with my girlfriend Olivia and her family for a week up in Puyallup. And actually, while I was up there, I almost say I met, but I was talking with Olivia's little sister, Krista, who has been watching this series of the Fitzherbert Chronicles and has apparently gotten hooked, which is really amusing considering the fact that I think what I do is actually kind of absurd. And the idea that someone like really enjoys what watching this is kind of like, okay then. But yeah, so when she's told me that and she said that was starting up a group, she wanted to kind of be a DM herself and play D&D. And actually, that was one of the things we did up there. Is I actually DM'd for Olivia and Krista and ran them through a short campaign that I kind of made up on the fly. She thought it went great, and so I felt I should do this kind of a how-to DM for her sake, as well as kind of realizing that there might be other people who have watched this channel or who have, had experience and kind of, been watching this and thought, I really would like to play D&D, or I'd really like to be a DM. I just don't know how to get going. And of course, there's tons of how to get started. I know the first episode where we talk about how to get started is going to be a little kind of on the cliche, a little kind of everyone does it, but I think afterwards, following videos where I talk about other tricks, other things I've learned, will be a little more helpful, a little less dime a dozen. So let's get right down to it. So how do you start playing D&D? Well, you have two options. If you want to play D&D, you either need to find a group that already exists, or you need to make your own group. Now, finding your own group requires that you just go around and talk to people. I guarantee if you live in a town of over 10,000 people, you probably definitely have some people playing D&D somewhere. Unless you live in 10,000 backwater nowhere, then maybe not. But odds are if you live in a normal town, you have someone playing D&D, and so you just got to ask around. I would consider going to, how to go about finding an existing group is kind of difficult. But I found that high schools and colleges are some of the kind of the best, almost breeding grounds for D&D. I mean, if you go to college, I guarantee there's at least almost half a dozen games running on campus. In which case, it just requires asking around, talking to maybe, sorry, sounds bad, some of the nerdier people, and I'm sure you'll find somebody who knows somebody who knows somebody who knows somebody who can get you hooked up. Now, if that's a bit of a hassle, or if you get into the group and maybe they play an edition you don't like, or maybe don't get along with the group, I mean, there could be a number of reasons why going with an existing group may not work out. In which case, your next option is then obviously to make your own group. That's what I did. And that was simply because I asked around actually, and I didn't find anybody playing D&D. So I figured let me just start up, and that was just it. As I told the story in the first episode of the Fitzherbert Chronicles, I walked in, I knew some people who had experience around D&D. For instance, I knew Sonia had some experience. I think I mentioned it to somebody. I was kind of asking around, or I think I overheard one of my other friends talking, so I went ahead and I talked to him. I said, hey, do you know how to play D&D? And he said, yeah. I was like, okay, well, who else? And we kind of got talking. We finally said, who wants to play D&D? A bunch of hands went up. And that's sometimes what you got to do. Sometimes you aren't in a great group setting to do that, to just announce who wants to play D&D. You kind of have to track down. If you're trying to figure out who would want to play D&D with you, some of the best ideas, kind of the best choices you can make is think about who's into fantasy, and who also really likes stories. I mean, people who, you can kind of typically find that those who love Lord of the Rings, rather I should say, those who love D&D are typically people who are also fans of stuff like Lord of the Rings or Fablehaven or Ranger's Apprentice, I don't know, kind of more fantastic novels. I'm sure you could list a huge list of people, of other novels that people who play D&D typically read that I don't even think of. Harry Potter, etc. They typically love a good story, and they love fantasy. Oftentimes, if they're maybe actors of some kind, they're kind of into the role playing. They'll be into that. And of course, they also really helps if they're social. They're usually a little more like they're usually a little more down for, hey, let's get a bunch of people together, let's sit around a table, let's hang out, play a game. That's kind of what you're looking for. You can kind of think about, okay, who do you know who is maybe into that? And you can also maybe, if you only have like one or two people that come to mind, you can maybe ask them, hey, do you know anybody who you think might also want to play? And really, all you need is if you can get at least 3 other people, you're good. If you can only get 2 other people, you can pull it off. Again, I played for Olivia and Krista when I was up there, and I just gave them like an NPC. I gave them 1 or 2 NPCs, and then they got a couple more, and pretty soon you had a party of 4 or 5, which works well. Ideally, that's how much you want. The books, the official like D&D rules say you ideally want 3 to 5 in a party. Now we have a group. We've got our people. They're sitting around the table. What's next? So the next thing you kind of have to ask yourself is, what do I need to play D&D? And it's actually way more simple than you think. If you were to really boil it down, if you have no idea how to play D&D, and to really boil it down to the absolute bare minimum necessities, all you need is a piece of paper, a pencil, a set of dice. As such, these are really cheap. I got these at there's a kind of a local nerd shop where I live in Richland. I got these for like $4, I think. They can get a little more expensive. Like I've known, there were sets there were like 10, but they're all like really intricate designs and marbled and stuff like that. There's some kind of cool stuff. But I mean, I got these for $4. You can go on Amazon, literally just Google D&D dice on Amazon, and you will get tons of options. If you're playing with a group, you want to try and make sure you have at least you're trying to see if you can get enough dice for everyone to have one set. And especially if you're a new DM and you're playing with new people, you don't want to immediately expect your players to buy their own set of dice, especially because they might play around and play a session and say, this really isn't for me. And then you don't want to have to basically tell them, oh yeah, there's like a $4 charge to even join my group with the potential that you may not even stick with this. So what I did is I went ahead and bought 3 dice. That wasn't right off the bat, but very shortly into playing, I bought 2 more sets of dice. That way, when I had new players, I could throw them a set and I could say, here, there you go, play. Krista, I know she bought like 7 sets for like $10 total on Amazon. So I mean, that's what you want. They're really simple. They were basically 7 sets of this in little bags. It looks great. It was cheap, and that's kind of what you're going for. Again, $10 isn't that big of a deal. The next thing you need is the rules, of course. The player's handbook. Yeah, the player's handbook. Now, this contains all the rules of how to play D&D. This is more of just, I mean, when I started off, all I had was my player's handbook and my dice, and that was all I had. I didn't have any of my other books. I didn't have any of my other stuff. This was all I knew. And so what I had to do is I had to basically read this. I mean, not like read page cover to cover, but I read it, skimmed it, figured out how do you play D&D? How does one as a player play in D&D? And if you can figure out, okay, how does a player do it? Usually you can just take that and figure out, okay, that's how you play D&D. And so that's what I did. Now, again, when I started off, I think I had a handbook, and I think Sydney had a handbook when we first started off our session with 7 people sitting around the table. And that was a bit of a pain in the butt, especially as people were trying to look up spells and stuff like that. It was a bit of a pain, but again, you don't want to require people that they buy this, because this is like $50 new and like 25 used. I went ahead and just sucked it up and just said, I need it now, $50, I'll take it. But there were some reasons that gave me a chance to read it over long drives so I could learn things, and that was actually really helpful. But if you don't want to fork out $50 right off the bat, you can also go online and look up the rules. Literally, just go. This is what I told Krista to do. I said, just go online and Google D&D 5e Player's Handbook PDF. And, you'll get a PDF and you download it, and I'm sure it's technically super illegal what I'm suggesting, but, as long as you intend to buy a book later, I think it's okay to use a PDF for now. And so that's what you do. You get a PDF, and you can usually get it for free, and you can look at it, you can kind of read it, and what you can do is you can then also have it on your phone, for instance, or you can tell your players, hey, why don't you go ahead and download this PDF? That'll be on your phone. That way you can kind of, if you need to look up a spell, you can just pull out your phone rather than needing to steal this all the time. And that helps. But again, I would recommend that you do get a physical copy. It's just much easier if you have one. All my players now have their own. But again, that's over time. That was after they said, yes, this is worth investing $50 plus hours upon hours upon hours of my time, and thus they were willing to buy the book. And I think at that point, that's when you do it. The next thing you need to think about, of course, is now I have my players, now I have the stuff I need, character creation. Well, again, as I said, all you need was a piece of paper. Well, really want a character sheet. As such. Now, this is actually a huge stack of character sheets. My friend Nathaniel, when I first got him going on D&D, he came back to me 2 weeks later and gave me a huge stack. It was like twice this thickness. There was nearly like a dozen characters. There was over a dozen characters. And he had just come up with them just because he was kind of bored / he really liked D&D, and so was kind of like really into the idea of creating characters. It was just fun for him. Again, this is something you can just go online. You can just download the PDF. I mean, you just say, hey, D&D 5e character sheet. It'll take you to the official site where they're like, here's the download it. You can download the character sheets, and that works great. And what I did is I went ahead and I met with each of my players one by one at different times prior to our first session, and I helped them kind of go over, okay, here's how you create characters. Here's all the stuff. I just work them through the beginning of the book. The first part of it is all about just creating your character, and thus it has a step-by-step on how to do it, and that was really helpful, and so I just did that with them. And that way when we got to the session, everyone had their character all ready to go. They already had a kind of an idea of what to do, because I would also run through this small simulation of, and it kind of gave them an idea of how to play D&D. That way they already kind of had some ideas in mind. That way when they got there, they weren't completely cold. So now we have people sitting around the table with character sheets ready to go, and we have all the stuff we need. And I'll add this last thing. You can make characters at the table. That's something I know some groups like to do, but is they'll all sit down around the table and they'll make their characters right there. They'll take an hour or two and they'll say, we're just going to start this session off by making our characters. And that can be good because it can allow you to kind of answer all questions at once. I kind of like the more personal, as it allowed me to kind of address questions as questions came up. Sometimes, for instance, Sam might have one question that Sonia never had, but vice versa. And that way, it worked for me. That way I also got a chance to kind of work with my players a little bit. Just that way we had a connection prior to me telling them, hey, stranger, come to my house and play a game with me. And again, it's all your cup of tea. What do you prefer? I do it this way, but I'm thinking now that my player's a little more experienced, I would probably say, let's meet up, let's make our characters, because we could probably crank them out in half hour even now. So we've got people sitting around the table with character sheets. We've got everything we need. Now we need a story. Now we kind of need to be like, okay, what are we going to do? And I'll say this. For your first adventure, all you need is a very simple quest, and you need a couple bad guys and a couple encounters. I'll go probably, one of my next videos will probably be a little more in-depth of making easy beginner sessions, basically. At first I ran D&D very episodic, so I just kind of said, you just need to be able to fill the 3-4 hours you're playing, and then that's it. That's all you want to fill. You don't want to create hangover, because that gets awkward. When you're creating your first quest, a fetch quest is a great one. Kind of being like, hey, have a NPC show up, be like, tell the party, hey, I want you guys to go into this cave, kill these skeletons, and retrieve this old sword for me, or retrieve this book for me, or whatever it might be. Simple fetch quests. Or it might even be, hey, an NPC says, the one I really like to use is I use this goblins in an old knight's tomb, and it's basically the party is in a tavern. The blacksmith busts in. He's raving about the fact that monsters took his daughter. The party, when they talked to him, they realized it basically was goblins. Goblins came and kidnapped his daughter. They took her into the woods. They follow the goblins. They come across an old tomb that's filled with goblins. They have 2 or 3 encounters with said goblins, and at the end is the daughter, and she's been being used for a sacrifice ritual. And it's a very easy, very simple first session. It works great. Another one is a simple fetch quest. Hey, go to this place, grab this thing, bring it back to me, I'll pay you. Very simple, straight to the point, easy. The players have a very defined objective. There is no room really for much interpretation, which when you're playing with new players is great because they're kind of confused of what am I doing? But if they understand, okay, I need to go here, do this thing, and get it back, that's easy for them. They can handle that. And then they can worry about, okay, well, how exactly do I go about doing it? I mean, like, yes, I go there, but what dice am I rolling? What all involved with that? And that's where it's important. If you know how to play D&D and you know what rules, ideas behind checks and safes and such, you can do that. You put a couple monsters in front of your players. You maybe put a couple guards, for instance, or maybe a scout. They run into like one or two scout patrols or something, and they have to kind of kill those, and that gives them some combat. Combat's great as it's very defined, easy, and I think it's one of the pillars of D&D. If you make them fight a couple monsters, that's simple, and then maybe have them like roll a couple checks, for instance, survival to maybe follow the tracks of the goblins, for instance, and then they have to roll dice, and they're getting to roll dice and learning to do that. You also put in a little bit of talking. They have to talk to an NPC. They have to negotiate maybe a price. What kind of reward are you going to give us if we go get this thing from the cave? And that way they kind of get the social interactions, the exploration, and the combat, the three pillars of playing Dungeons and Dragons. And if you can figure that out, again, you only need to put maybe 3 or 4 encounters, kind of, that being a social interaction, a major social interaction, say, like if you're meant to be talking to this person for a while, fighting any traps or stuff like that. If you get 3 or 4 of those encounters for your first session, that should fill it up pretty well. And again, if you do something simple like a fetch quest, boom, the players will get that. They'll have their stuff. They'll feel rewarded. They'll feel accomplished that they did this and they went to this place, they got that, and they completed their own quest, their first session. They'll be super excited and they'll be ready to taste more. And in the interim period, you can kind of get better quests and build up your world and stuff like that. And that stuff we'll talk about in subsequent videos. I just wanted to say, you're playing D&D, you got to get your players, they got to get the characters, you have to get the stuff you need. You need to know what you need to do, kind of like know how to play D&D yourself, and you need to have some sort of short quest that they can do for a first session. Now, another thing I want to bring up is, monsters and stuff like that, and NPCs and stuff like that. Krista was kind of worrying about, she was like, do I need to get a monster manual as well? And I said, absolutely not. But we can go more in depth into making monsters and such, but when I first started off, there's 2 options you can do. You can either go, if you go onto the D&D website, they have like pre-generated characters and ideas. That way, if you have a bunch of players, or if you have maybe a friend who's going to come over for one session, he's not sure he's ever going to really play again, but he wants to hang out. What you can do is you can print off a character for him, pre-generated. It's got a race, stats, everything's ready to go. They're really actually nice, and there's like 12 different, I think there's 20 different options, like combinations of races and classes, combined with level, and then for each combination there's levels 1 through 10. So this is a first level Dragonborn sorcerer, but I could have also gotten this guy all the way up to 10th level and everywhere in between. And that way, if I have a party who's maybe 10th level, rather than having to create a whole new character and give all his abilities, I just print off one, say, here you go, let's play. Now, for monsters, what I did is I just did note cards. You can't really see. I just made note cards, and I just wrote, here's what it's called, here's its AC, here's HP, its speed, here's the modifiers for all its different stats, here's maybe a little bit of I gave it a little bit of gear, and then I gave it 1 or 2 abilities, just something so it wasn't just swinging its sword every time. And these monsters don't need to be super incredible. They just need to be, decent, just enough. And again, as you go, you can kind of create your own sort of things. Eventually, you can get a monster manual if you want. It's your choice. I would suggest getting a monster manual eventually, but that doesn't. You could wait. You could survive with note cards and stuff like that for a year. Again, you can also download a PDF for the 5e Monster Manual. I have a copy of the PDF, but that's simply because I already bought the book and I said I don't mind having it. I keep it on my phone. That way, if I'm off elsewhere, I can if I have a question or an idea, I can look it up real fast. That's why. So I think that's really everything you need for your first session to get started. I know this video is a little bit long. I'm kind of looking at the timer as I'm filming this, and I'm at like 23 minutes or so. You know, there's a couple edits I'll make, but this is going to be fairly more or less the final product. So, again, what do you need? Players to play with. Ideally, you want a party of at least 3. If you can only get 2, you can add an NPC and you can survive. Just make sure the NPC is fairly submissive. They're not very dominant. That's important. Secondly, you need your gear. You need dice. Everyone should try and get dice. If 1 or 2 people have to share a set of dice, that's okay. You'll be fine. But try and get everybody a set of dice. You need to know the rules. Ideally, if you're going to play, I would try and have at least 1 physical copy of the player's handbook. You could print up the PDF, but that's a lot of paper and a lot of ink. And personally, I think it's just better to maybe suck it up. Go ahead and buy a copy of the player's handbook. You can go ahead and buy used, and you should be fine. You need some enemies, basically. Quick note cards make for perfect, or you can Google some ideas off of the Monster Manual and such. And finally, you need a short quest for your players. They need something to do. If they have a short little quest, a fetch quest works great. They will feel accomplished, they'll feel rewarded, and they'll want to come back to your table. As always, guys, thank you guys for watching. Stay cool.